Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Courageous Curiosity, our podcast here in the Novi Community School District, where we tackle questions that pique our interest or questions that we get a lot that we really want to talk about within our community, within our school system. And a lot of the topics we talk about, and today is certainly no different, apply to kind of a broader audience. They apply to more than just what I would say is a school audience. I'm excited today, as I always am, to have just incredibly talented people that I get to work with and talk with. And this show gives an opportunity for experts in certain fields to be able to come and display some different things. So we have three amazing people with us today. We're going to be talking about the rise in risk behaviors for students. We get a lot of questions about what are some of the things you're seeing in students and children today, the rise of just the behaviors that they've had compared to maybe the way that it was in the past. And I think people refer to the good old days, but I remember when I was a kid, the good old days, there were still a lot of risky behaviors going on. But I will say that, people often say, well, what are the parents like? What is that? What are the difference in some of those things? And I think there's definitely changes that we've seen post-pandemic, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And we have some people who work with students, kids. We also have a tremendous benefit of learning from somebody who works in school safety and specializes in gun violence, among many other things that you're going to learn from today. And we're going to talk about just kind of the rise of risk behaviors and what we're seeing in kids. And so to kind of get us started, we're going to have some introductions. For those of you that are in the Novi area, the two people that are sitting to my right and left, you'll probably know pretty well. But we're going to introduce some different guests today. So Detective Warren, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, give us your elevator pitch on kind of your role and how you work with kids.
Thank you. So I'm Detective Warren. I am the school resource officer here in the school district. I am one of two. I work at the middle school. I have been a police officer for 18 years. And, I think a lot of times people think school resource officers are security and, this and that, but we have so many hats that we wear, from counselor to role model to just really interacting with the kids and kind of helping them, guide them in the right direction. I truly enjoy what I do, but I will say that this is a great topic because these behaviors are just getting worse and worse and worse. And I deal with kindergarten through 8th grade, so many different schools, and it's
Yeah, for sure. And it's not a coincidence that, you're seeing those rising things at earlier ages, which is also why we have one of we call them intermediate school, but really you're an elementary school principal, right? So Lisa Fenchel, who is our principal at Novi Meadows, our 5-6 building, tell us a little bit about your background and your elevator pitch on how you work with kids.
Sure. I'm Lisa Fenchel. I'm one of the principals at Meadows, which is the 5-6 building in the district. So we work with students who are 10, 11, and 12 years old. Mm-hmm. I have been in the district for 32 years, so I've seen kind of that age level change over time. And we do have some, and I don't know if it's post-pandemic or just kind of the nature of our society today, but we do see different behaviors today than we used to. And some of them are certainly concerning, and we've tried to put some programs in place to help, but I think we still have some challenges.
Sure. All right, so we're really fortunate to be able to be joined by Dr. Marc Zimmerman. Dr. Zimmerman is a professor at the University of Michigan, and Dr. Zimmerman, you wear a lot of hats, so kind of tell us a little bit about your work and kind of how you enter this space.
We're a bunch of old people because I've been at this for about 30 plus years myself. So I kind of studied adolescent development and positive youth development for really most of that time. And now that kind of led to many different hats. I'm co-director of the Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention, an institute that we just started here at the University of Michigan a few years ago. We also have a National Center for School Safety funded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance in Washington, D.C. And recently, the state of Michigan has charged us to work on a focused Michigan initiative for school safety. So this is an area of work that I've certainly been involved in, both in terms of doing some of the research, but then also doing some evidence-based efforts to try to see what we can do to improve school behavior, school outcomes, and reduce school violence.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of work that you're engaged in, and it's vital and important. And so I'm going to start, Dr. Zimmerman, with just kind of a question about, obviously you've done a lot of research around gun violence and, some very extreme, behaviors that are plaguing society and things like that. I know that a lot of times when we're talking about gun violence or some of these really extreme behaviors, they all originate someplace, right? So there are these precursors to these types of events. So what are some of the behaviors that your maybe research has unearthed that are happening at younger ages? Because obviously, typically we don't talk about gun violence with, obviously those things can impact a younger population. But when we think about some of the things that lead to, the trajectory in one's life without intervention and support, what are some of the things you're seeing in your work at early ages?
It's really interesting. You set it up perfectly well. The issue of gun violence is actually the tip of the iceberg, and what underlies the iceberg are all the same kind of things that you would expect that would result in sort of that heinous outcome. And some of those factors are things like parental support or lack thereof, lack of parental engagement. So we look at risk factors, so that's a risk factor. We look at poverty as a risk factor, mental health issues are a risk factor. And then we look at also what are some things that help kids overcome these issues. Let me also say that when we think about school violence, we don't just think about firearm violence. We don't also just think about physical violence. It's also psychological violence, cyberbullying, bullying in general. Fights, of course, is physical violence. So we think about all of it. And also school violence isn't just directed at youth. We often forget about the teachers and the administrators that are in the school as well. And one of our sort of mantras is that school violence starts at home, and that school violence is really an adult problem. We are the models for the kids, and so when kids see their parents fighting and solving a problem, they model that behavior. When kids see their parents coming in and bullying a teacher because they may have been too strict on their kid or had done something that they thought was unfair, when they handle that in a very aggressive way, the children learn those kinds of behaviors, and that's how to solve a problem. So there's certainly, we have to look in the mirror when we want to think about how do we create a safer school.
Yeah, and I so appreciate what you said, and I think you've teed it up perfectly for that next segue, but I love how you said, our problems oftentimes are not child problems, they're adult problems, and I think that's so true in many of the things that we face. We have almost 7,000 young people that we serve every day, but most of the time, the challenges that we face are around the adults in that system, right? But I think it's a great segue. Lisa, you've been a principal for a long time. You've been in the district a long time. What Dr. Zimmerman was describing, I think, in at least some of our conversations, you're seeing that play out as in your building as a principal as early as fifth grade.
Yeah, certainly. I would say that there is a rise in the physically aggressive kinds of behaviors with students, or disrespectful kind of language, and I think that's twofold. I think, one, yes, they might be seeing it outside of school, whether that is from parents or from video games, and I think that technology itself is something that there's increased use, as well as it's a good way for kids to kind of hide behind a screen and maybe say or do things they wouldn't face-to-face with people. So.
Yeah, and Dr. Zimmerman, you talked about that example that the adults set, and they do see that playing out. I mean, you see obviously parents coming and having that conversation with you that's maybe more aggressive, or what did you do to my child versus, I understand my child may have made an error and kids make mistakes, right? But Detective Warren, how do you kind of experience this adult behavior shift? Have you seen that? I know you do other police work, and sometimes you're working the road and things like that. Have you seen the adults playing this narrative out as well?
Definitely. I very much think that it starts at home. So anytime, Lisa will call me or a different principal calls me and they tell me about a student, I say, okay, I pull up my police computer, I look at the background, I kind of try to get the whole picture of the student and see where their foundations are so that we can better support them. I think that we feel like, because we're in Novi, the best school district there is, in the state, that we don't have these risky behaviors, and we cannot close our eyes. We cannot be so closed-minded to the fact that things happen here. Our kids do expose and do risky behavior, but I blame a lot of that on social media.
Yeah.
I mean, our kids are exposed to TikTok, the TikTok challenges, Snapchat. I think that it was years ago that Bricky called me, and it was probably 4 years ago, and read me a chain of text messages, Snapchats of 11 fifth graders. I've seen so much. I was appalled at the language. I was appalled at how they were talking to each other. It was sad, and it hasn't got any better.
So how did you do? I mean, fifth graders aren't supposed to even have social media, right? It's
Gotta
like nobody in your building should even have a social media account.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. We spend a lot of time during the day dealing with the fallout from social media. They're 10, 11, 12-year-olds. Most of the apps they're on, you're required to have a minimum age of 13. So although we don't have control over what happens at home, the fallout is then impacting their school day. So we spend a lot of time trying to unweed or understand where people were coming from. Kids will say, oh, it disappears. Nope, somebody took a screenshot of it. And a lot of times we do have to get parents involved. Parents will say, oh, I deleted that app, but they've got 3 other accounts that are in the same app. So some of it is just trying to stay a couple steps ahead of the kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's such it's plaguing so many different parts of it. And Dr. Zimmerman, you talked about, cyberbullying as a form of violence and psychological violence and things like that. I didn't have a cell phone personally until I was in college. And actually, my wife actually had one of the first ones, which was like a car phone that opened up. It was a big brick, and it had like the cord that you plugged in the cigarette later. Dating myself a little bit, but Dr. Zimmerman, talk about this concept, right? So we're unearthing this social media challenge, and how is that contributing? And what are some ways that this was being talked about or addressed? Maybe on a national or state level.
I think it's a quandary. We don't really know. Some of the research that's been going on is we don't really know yet. We're trying to figure this out. I think it's important, though, that there isn't just one culprit here. I mean, social media is certainly it can and does play a role. There's the immediacy of it. It's the anonymity potentially of it. There's all sorts of unique aspects of it. It's part of the fabric of our culture at this point that I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle on this one. So we have to kind of think about, well, what are some of the things we need to do to help kids be better consumers of that? There are some benefits potentially of social media, and how can social media be used in beneficial ways and try to help direct them in those ways. I mean, it's very easy, especially in our culture. I mean, we look at social media, look at television. We just talked about parents. Look at our political leaders. Look at what's going on just in our country and the division that's happening. Why would we be surprised that our children would not reflect what is really happening and how, I don't know quite how it's gotten to this point, frankly. But, when I was growing up, different people would disagree, but they would agree that they would still respect one another. And so building back that respect, I think, is something that we have to sort of changing our culture and the way we interact with each other, and then and put those expectations on kids. What we do in the schools is we talk about 3 different environments. The social environment, which is sort of school climate, it's policies, it's how people are expected to behave and interact with each other. Secondly, it's the what we call the it slipped my mind what we call it. It's the attentive environment. This is the recognizing signs when something's going awry in somebody's life, when they start acting in ways that are unusual, and letting authorities know about that so that the help can be obtained. And then there's the physical environment of locking doors and all that sort of thing. And, that prevents people from coming in who shouldn't be there. But the social environment's really important. That's social climate, social emotional learning, how to handle your emotions in a way that isn't aggressive. But we have restorative justice programs where if you've wronged somebody, you have consequences for trying to make that right with that person. And so school safety teams that Detective Warren isn't probably involved in, or I mean, you described exactly the kind of roles that we talk about in terms of SRA, school resource SROs, I'm sorry, school resource officers, in playing not necessarily an arrest and strictly law enforcement role. Of course, that's part of it, but part of it is understanding the whole kid, understanding the environment, being part of that community, and creating a sense of safety and belonging. And those things, they sound wishy-washy, but those things matter to kids. Safety and security matter. And if they feel safe and secure and hold each other responsible for treating each other that way, then we're finding that can help turn around some of these aggressive behaviors. We also have an after-school program where we engage kids in building community, in feeling a sense of community. So they work on either their school or their neighborhood, and they work on a community project together. And the curriculum is a scaffolding to help them, think critically about their community and build that work up. It's called the Youth Empowerment Solutions Program. And, we find that they do better in school. They're more engaged in school. They're less aggressive than kids who are not involved in the program. So I think there's things we can do, but we have to have the wherewithal and interest. And it's a big lift. And you guys are working in schools every day. You're charged with teaching the 3 R's, and now you're charged with this. And there's a lot that happens in a school building that I think it's a lot to ask of our schools, but I think we have to. But we have to also give the resources to the schools to be able to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you brought up so much there. The resources are critical. And I think you're right. It's interesting because we were talking about social media. And I think, for parents to know that, hey, sometimes there's a developmentally appropriate way to introduce those platforms, but probably 5th grade elementary school is not that place. We could do, 3 or 4 days worth of full shows on social media and the impact that we're seeing in that. But Dr. Zimmerman brought up a good point, which is really about, that's one factor. But if even the absence of social media, if kids are at home and they're seeing this division play out amongst the adults, and we could, whether we're talking more egregious things like racism and things like that they might see or hear in the music they're listening to or watch on TV, and then they bring that into the schoolhouse, right? They're also hearing some of that at home. They're trying to figure out how to navigate and be like adults, and they see that happening. So kind of shifting gears for a second, we're seeing at our elementary level, actually, interestingly, probably more than at our high school level, we're seeing a rise in physical aggression, in kind of, I will say, racial slurs or name calling, things like that. And obviously, kids do not inherently pick this up, right? So that's what I've observed as the superintendent working at a high level with a variety of different people. Detective Warren, speak about, does that concur with what you're seeing in the elementary grades, which is kind of alarming because it used to be that was never, even on our radar, but I think it's become more and more, not just in Novi. I know this is a real issue across the state and nation, but are you seeing those behavior changes at earlier ages?
Absolutely. I say all the time, man, this is getting earlier and earlier and younger, and what can we do? I mean, I look at school and being a school resource officer is there's so much behavior that's learned at home. There's some at school, there's some from social media, but we have to find ways to help guide the kids and help and teach them. And so I always say, okay, this could be a great teachable moment, but absolutely younger and younger from the threats, the things that kids are saying to each other, not realizing the long repercussions of what they're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, and the racial slurs and the physical and all of that. Yeah. Younger and younger. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm assuming you're seeing the same thing.
Absolutely. And we actually are in the process this week of talking to our fifth graders about words have weight and what does that mean. And the words that you use, you don't necessarily get to pick how that falls on the person that hears them. And really getting kids to understand that the language they pick or they choose to use is very important and can have positive or negative consequences. We've also really tried to send out some information through our newsletters to parents to give them resources and to help them be a partner with us because, clearly they go home and they can be exposed to or have access to a lot of things that we don't have control over. And just making parents aware that those things are out there and that their children are participating in them. Sometimes parents need to be given permission to set parameters, and by the school saying to them, hey, it's okay to ask your child to plug their cell phone in your room at night. Yep. They go, oh, okay, I will.
Yeah.
So it's definitely about building that partnership between adults.
I'm so glad you brought up the fact that you're talking with the kids about, words have weight, and we're really looking at next year diving into some, more district-wide, aligned positive behavior systems and character education and really teaching these other things. As Dr. Zimmerman, you talked about the fact that we're not just teaching the 3 R's anymore, but we, and you both said it, we have the children and we're really pouring into them, but this is a partnership with home, right? And so when we think about the time that we don't have them, there's obviously some things that we might be able to shed some light on that could help parents or anyone watching this show. So Dr. Zimmerman, you've done some work around this area. What can we think about as parents and to kind of round out the community with the school? You've done some work on empowerment theory or positive youth development theory. Talk a little bit about what that is, and then maybe if you could shed some light on some actionable things that maybe families and parents can do to assist in some of these more aggressive or risk behaviors.
Those are really you only wanted to go for half an hour or
yeah.
so.
That's true.
I was, you're talking to a professor, so
right.
Be careful what you ask for. But I think the real thing is, what we're amazed when we work with middle school aged kids. That's who the Youth Empowerment Solutions program was, and what we're always amazed at is just how much they have to offer. But they're not often given the opportunity to do that because they're needing to learn how to, do math, right? And they're often talked to. But what we find is one of the things we said in the after school program is we wanted to make it fun. We didn't want to make it school all over again. So we had a lot of active learning. So I think at home, similar kind of thing, engaging kids and in valuing what they have to contribute. Engaging kids in family decision making, we find, is helpful to kids.
Interesting.
They don't make the final decision, but the fact that they start learning how to think critically about, well, we could go to this amusement park, but then we won't be able to also go to the zoo. If we go to do this, we can do the zoo and this and that. And what do you think would be more fun? Simple things like that we do, engaging our children in decision making, helps empower them that they have some efficacy and agency in the world, and that they are valued. And I think expressing those things in different places, whether it's in school or at home, and opportunities to do that, helps them. And I think similarly, engaging parents in ways that are real ways in schools rather than necessarily, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but raising funds for this program or that program, but getting involved in some real school relevant activities where they're valued and what they bring to the school will help them come back and say, look, I made a difference. And that's important for the human condition. People like to feel respected. Even little kids like to feel respected, feel like they have something that they can contribute, and to feel good about themselves.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion, and I think to add to some of those simple things that you can do, even talking to your children about how you would disagree with somebody who has maybe a different philosophy. I mean, it doesn't have to be as deep as politics or political perspectives or religion, but I think we can agree that teaching kids that it's okay to live in a world where people think differently and people are going to have different perspectives. And so how do we respect that? Because they certainly are not seeing that playing out in the adults in society. So I think that's a huge thing. We talk about that a lot. We're getting ready to actually this week, we're administering surveys through our 7 through 12 students. So I know that the Meadows kids aren't getting it. But we're really starting to ask questions about, substance abuse, drugs, sexual behaviors, physical aggression. We're going to start collecting some of this data. And it's, some people think, don't ask my kids those questions, but we really do need to understand what some of the things that they're coming up against. It's obviously an anonymous survey, but we're also doing a survey on their school experience. We're asking kids, how do you experience school, right? What are you, when you come to school, do you feel like you belong? Do you feel like you have voice? All of those types of things. And I'm going to end in just a second with a little piece about that. But we're going to be collecting this information for a reason. We want to understand these risk behaviors. Dr. Zimmerman talked about, what he's seeing. Obviously, you've heard us talk about this. But we really want to try and dive into this and help be, an opportunity to be a support to families and to anyone that's looking to combat some of this rise in behavior that we're seeing in our kids. So for people that are watching this show, for somebody that would say, this is an interesting topic, I'd like to, I'm thinking about this, what would you like to leave them with? I want to give each of you an opportunity to just kind of share some closing thoughts in relation to this topic, which is so heavy and so important. So Dr. Zimmerman, we'll start with you.
I think about your child as sort of an extension of yourself, and make sure that you're modeling the behaviors you want your child to have. And don't be surprised when you see those behaviors playing themselves out, both positively and negatively. And the other thing I would say is, let's try to focus on what's right and what's good and what things we can improve, rather than focusing just on the negative things and reducing a risk factor. Let's try to promote the positive things, because we find that when you promote positive aspects, that's as good as trying to prevent, and maybe even better, trying to prevent the negative things, because they take care of themselves then.
That's a great point. Detective Warren?
I would say be open-minded. When Ms. Fenchel sends newsletters home, don't say, my kid would never do this or be exposed to this. Be open-minded. Our kids are growing, they're learning, their brains are developing. They're going to make good choices and bad choices. So be open-minded and have good open communication with your kids. Talk to them about social media, talk to them about their day. And again, just don't be closed-minded to, my kid would never do that.
Sure, absolutely. Mrs. Fenchel?
I would say just remembering that schools want to be partners with parents, and that it does really take that partnership in order for students to be successful. And that if parents ever need to talk through a situation or get advice, that's what the schools are there for. And remind parents that it's okay to set boundaries when it comes to technology. And children may be upset or be crabby about it, but that's okay. As adults, that's our job to keep them safe.
Sure. I'm honored and blessed to have the opportunity to have done this with all of you. You guys are great. I appreciate your insights. And for those of you that are watching, we're every other Tuesday, we release these episodes, and we try to have conversations that are relevant, things that are things we're wrestling with. I personally am better for this episode. I learned a lot, both as a parent and as an educator. But I really just want to thank all of you, the three of you, for being here, donating your time to this project and this discussion. I do want to let everybody know that in a couple weeks we'll release the next episode, which is going to be an interview with with our student panels. So Dr. Zimmerman talked about engaging students in their voice. We have student panels at Meadows and the middle school and the high school, and you're going to hear from some of our students at each of those on what that is like and how they engage in the decision-making process around the district. So looking forward to talking to some of our kids at our next episode, but thank you for your attention today, and I hope everybody stays curious. Have a great day.